maybe emotions are trying to show me something. Maybe emotions have a
Mm,
purpose.
mhm.
Well, then that opens up the question of what are they trying to show me?
Hola, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Heal and Manifest podcast. I am Cynthia Flores, your host. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. I'm a coach, speaker, and I have a special guest today, which I will introduce in a minute. Before we get started, I want to really remind you all, the audience, whoever is listening, if any of these episodes from this podcast resonate with you, to please share the love, to share it with your loved ones. If they're needing any help, any support with their navigating their mental health challenges, or just needing inspiration, I would like you to share that with them. Also follow, listen through Spotify and YouTube, subscribe, and share and tag me and all of my amazing guest speakers that are coming in to talk about their knowledge, their wisdom. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to share. Today's topic is a very, very important topic. It's talking about really learning how to practice self compassion, especially during difficult times. And this is such an important topic because I know that a lot of us at some point in our lives, we have struggled with being self compassionate, with being patient with ourselves, with giving ourselves grace. And I realized that in doing this work as a therapist and doing trauma work, a lot of my clients really struggle with being kind with themselves, with talking to themselves in a nice way, being kind. And I realized that nobody really teaches us how to do that. Knowing that this is something that we learn throughout our lives, typically in our adulthood, right? And it's something that we need to learn. But I wanted to just share, before I introduce my special guest, just a little bit of the research that is out there on self-compassion. According to the neuroscience research, self-compassion is really a practice of treating oneself with kindness, understanding, and support during difficult moments and distress. And some of the research does indicate that it involves three components, and that includes self kindness. And what that means is being gentle and caring when you speak to yourself, especially with your self talk and how you think about yourself. And two is the common humanity, is really understanding and recognizing that we are all having a human experience, that we all struggle in our own unique ways, and we are not alone in this experience. And three is really also self compassion integrates mindfulness, is rather than avoiding, repressing, suppressing our emotions and what comes to us, is really acknowledging some of these painful emotions, is recognizing, is honoring and identifying them, right? Without overly attaching to them, but just more of being the observer of what comes up, right? And what that does is that activates different brain regions associated with emotional regulation, and it reduces stress, it reduces our trauma response, and it also fosters resilience and well-being. So I wanted to share this because I know that there's a lot of information out there, but self-compassion is not something that, we just throw around of like, okay, you need to be more compassionate with yourself or more caring with yourself or kind. No, there's actually research, there's neuroscience research that indicates that when we do integrate it, it impacts it really improves our mood, our well-being, our mental health. So this is, at the end of the day, science-based. So yeah, I wanted to share that. And with that said, I want to introduce my special guest, Claudia Parada. She is a San Francisco native and expert therapist and energy healer. She empowers first-gen Latinx women and BIPOC to decolonize their body, mind, and spirit to connect with their true selves. with over a decade of holistic life coaching, 7 years of Mesoamerican traditional medicine apprenticeship, and extensive psychotherapy training, Claudia really centers professionals of color to reimagine collective healing and building community. Thank you, Claudia, for being here with me and talking about such an important topic. Thank you. I guess welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really excited about our topic. And thank you so much for the warm welcome. I can't wait to dive in.
Of course, of course. I know that even initially starting this episode, we were kind of struggling with some, technical challenges and difficulties. But, I think as therapists, right, and in doing this work, we realize, hey, this is part of the process. It's okay. We have time. So let's be kind and gentle and understanding that things happen, right? We're not going to engage in this negative self-talk or like criticism. And yeah, so I guess for you in this work that you are doing, and even in your personal experience, how have you resonated with self-compassion? What does this mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really wonderful question. I love the definitions and the three components that you offered at the beginning of the episode. And for me, it really does, the foundation of it really means being able to be gentle and kind to the different experiences that it is that you're having, and almost approaching yourself like you would a young child. Like, because those parts of ourselves are so like it can be so challenging to have difficult experiences and emotions. And when our kids are having a hard time, you don't want to shame them or tell them to go to their room. Like, you really want to be able to be with them and say, "Hey, I see that you're feeling really frustrated, or I see that you're having a really hard time with that," and really like attune to that part in a really caring way. So I like that all of what you said, and bringing in the tenderness and the spaciousness to just be with.
Yeah, totally agree. I love that approach. I love thinking about ourselves as this kind of either our inner child or inner niña, and really embracing these different parts of ourselves, maybe disowned selves or parts that perhaps we become very rigid, very inflexible, and maybe we have all of these different expectations of ourselves, right? Through our own these could be our own expectations. These could also be the expectations of our family, our parents, societal, cultural expectations and conditionings. And what ends up happening is that we take all of that and we internalize these things, and we carry all of that weight. And oftentimes I realize that when in doing this work, and when clients come to me and they're like, well, you know what, I feel like I need to be in a certain place in my life right now,
Right,
career
right.
wise. I need to already have started a family or be married, or there's like all of these external pressures that I think we need to acknowledge and recognize that everyone has experienced these in their own unique ways, but that we need to start also going through that process of maybe challenging them in a more graceful way, right? In a more curious way of where are these coming from, and realizing, well, where are all of these coming from? Which ones are my individual expectations,
Right.
and which ones are the ones that are coming from my environment and the external world? And when it comes to self-compassion, I do realize that a lot of my clients, and I think this is something that I've experienced at some point in my life, is that it's really challenging to speak to themselves in a way that is loving, in a way that is caring, in the way that is understanding and patient, because nobody in their lives were like that with them.
Absolutely.
And then it's like, but sometimes they're like, but how do I do this? How do I get to change my mind? How do I get to change my thoughts? How do I get to change this inner dialogue? And I guess I'm curious for you, in either personal story or in the work that you've done, what has been your experience with this?
I mean, you're saying like you're dropping the gems right now, girl. Like so good. I mean, you're really speaking also to like the mindfulness part of it because it'd be so powerful to like unpack. Oh, that's that voice that my dad had with me when he was feeling
Mm,
really impatient with me. And I'm saying the same thing to myself when I'm having a hard experience. Like, how many of us heard, like, ya parece llorar, like, ya no
mm,
más. And now we wonder, like, oh, it's so hard for me to cry. And I'm like, well, yeah, because listen to the messages that we heard when we were younger.
mhm,
And I think the thing that is so powerful about healing work is the question, what would you have wanted to hear instead?
mm,
And to really like sit with that question and curiosity and kind of like say those things out loud and like allow yourself to be witness to that, to like work with a maestra or work with a therapist or talk to a friend. And I'm like, oh, I would have really liked to have had my mom come over to me and say, hey, like, I see that you're crying or
mhm,
whatever, right? Like, this could be so many different things that are so unique to the individual. But wow, to open that question and say that out loud. And I've like actually at working at my child's preschool, like to volunteer in the classroom,
mm,
I've heard their teacher say things that felt so healing for me, where I'm like, I had no idea that adults talk like this to young children. Like
mm,
she's like, I
mhm,
see you, Amate. And I'm like, oh, like that hits home for me too. So I'm
mhm.
like exploring this language that we didn't get a chance to hear, kind of like just offering it to ourselves.
Yeah, that is powerful. And just even hearing that, I'm just like get feeling very emotive because you're right. And it's like getting to that point of, okay, this is how I talk to myself, right? And this is some of the very common things that I hear is I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not smart enough, I'm stupid, I am ugly, I am, I don't have what it takes, right? Nobody loves me, nobody cares about me. And I mean, I can name so many of them. And I realize, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned something very important that typically what I see in doing trauma work is that a lot of this negative inner dialogue and negative self talk does come from either our caregivers, our family. So either our parents, our mom, our dad's voice becomes our own voice, right?
Right.
And it's so internalized to the point that when you start growing up developmentally, right, as you're even as a child, you're building that identity. And when you grow up, you have other experiences that reinforce somehow
Hmm.
these beliefs, these very much internalized limiting beliefs that make people really feel bad about themselves, so negative, like hating themselves, hating their lives, not feeling like they're gonna like there's any hope for the future, right? And of course, like adverse, that's what adverse childhood experiences does and trauma does, is that it literally changes the wiring of your brain and your body. And when it comes to learning and either coming through therapy or doing other healing work with coaching or doing mindfulness meditation or doing any other work, healing work, this is where people are like, okay, well, this is really, really hard. This is really, really hard work because, like I said, it is so wired in your brain and in your body. And part of this process, I do think that it does require a level of just being patient with oneself and really trusting that perhaps you are not where you want to be, but that you
Right.
can give yourself permission to be a learner of life, right? To have this growth mindset and realizing, well, it's okay for me to be where I'm at, even though it's exhausting, it's frustrating. I'm learning. Every little step is taking me to that direction where I want to go or where I want to be or how I want to feel. So those are the little small wins that I think are very, very important when it comes to like building and cultivating self-compassion, to really acknowledge,
Mm-hmm.
to just even sit with it and be like, hey, this is part of the process. And I know it sounds very like, cliche, to trusting the journey, trusting the process, but it is in that process where we learn, and I guess what are your thoughts on this?
Oh my God, so many. I think the beautiful thing about having someone hold space for you, like in therapy, or something that like I've seen actually coaches do, some coaches do really, really well, is say like, let's celebrate your accomplishment, or like, there's the let's give you your flowers, or like let's celebrate the small wins. And for a long time, I like prior, why would I do that? Like graduating from high school, like, oh, okay. Or like graduating from college, like, well, no big deal. Everybody gets that. I feel like it's so easy for us to tell ourselves that's just a small thing. Everybody does it. But
Mm,
when you give yourself an opportunity to let that in and like pause and acknowledge, like, today I had a hard moment, but then I, I don't know, like gave myself space to feel it. And like, I actually like implemented a tool that was new, like that actually lets yourself know, hey, I am changing. Like, hey,
mm-hmm,
I can do hard things. So those beliefs that we originally believed about ourselves that make us feel really rigid and constrained begin to change. Like these things actually don't have to mean those things that I thought. They can mean other things. And then I feel different about myself
mm-hmm,
because I'm acknowledging that I am different and changing. Like I
mm-hmm.
think that that's what makes it so powerful. I used to be like, oh yeah, like I don't need to do that, whatever. And then when I started doing it and when I do it with my clients, they're like, oh, yeah, I am doing all this. I am making all this progress. So the
Mm,
goal, sure, maybe the goal is still far, but then you see like these milestones that you're hitting.
mm, mm-hmm. And that's something that I personally, in my personal life, I've been reflecting. Is like, I think that you're healing, and for me, I know when I've I've healed or I'm healing. I don't think we're fully healed. I think this is an ongoing work and process and
Hmm.
progress. But I knew that my mindset about myself and my negative self dialogue and self talk and self criticism changed and shifted when I realized, hey, I don't have to be this perfect human being. Like, I can acknowledge my humanity. I can acknowledge and honor my emotions as they come, and even my thoughts, and not overly attach to them. Just become the observer. Yes, process them. Yes, do what I need to do. If I need to cry it out, if I need to take a deep breath, if I need to stretch my body or move my body to feel and then release whatever I need to do. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's who I am. That does
Hmm.
not make me, that is not my identity. These are just thoughts that come up. But I have been able to think through, okay, well, I've been through other difficult situations in my life, and I've was resilient, and I persevered, and I was determined. Even though there was a lot of fear, worry, uncertainty, anxiety, depression, I was able to get through that. And, just like remembering my journey, since I started healing until now, I realized, even like as I'm getting ready, or like for the day, or there's a difficult situation I'm going through and I'm feeling very stressed, it's going to be okay. Like, I know I am very much capable of figuring it out, you know? And that has been such a really powerful and empowering and just healing kind of mindset and approach for me to kind of get through the day, or just be more present, even, right, without like pushing it away as well. Because I think what
Right.
happens is that a lot of people push these emotions away, they repress them. Why? Because they may not have those inner tools, that ability to process, to sit with their emotions, and separate, emotions, thoughts, and actions, behaviors. These are all
Right.
completely different things. They all work in this kind of nonlinear cycle. but when we learn to kind of detach ourselves from them, it and then practice and integrate it, then you're going to have a different kind of outcome, right? So
Yeah.
and what are your thoughts on giving ourselves permission to feel our emotions? Like, what would that look like, or how have you helped your clients or your
Mhm.
community with that?
Well, so I mean, to your point, what you're talking about is like I think a lot of folks who are starting on their healing journey and a lot of folks who come as clients, they have been shown this message in one way or another, either explicitly or implicitly. Having certain emotions or having emotions at all, expressing emotions, bad. That's not good. And maybe because parent didn't have capacity, or maybe that's what they were taught. So there's like a turning away from the parent or like a shutting down. So then, of course, like that's what you're going to do in adulthood. You're going to shut down your own emotions. And the coupled belief, like the thing that is then attached, is like, well, emotions are bad. So when you begin
Mm,
to uncouple that, and I know that you're asking, okay, well, how do we do that? Right? When we begin to
mm,
uncouple that, there can be more space to have a different belief about it. Well, maybe emotions are trying to show me something. Maybe emotions have a
mm,
purpose.
mm,
Well, then that opens up the question of what are they trying to show me? I think the thing that feels most important in therapy when we begin to try to uncouple these things is doing it in a way that's like bite sized enough to metabolize it. We're like, let's just like maybe explore this in like a very, what the therapy word would be, it's like titrated, right? We're going to take it in a small dose. They call it like dipping your toe in the pool, and we're going to like see how that is. And usually I'm like, okay, well, maybe that is like we're exploring a thought or an emotion, or we're going to a sensation in the body. And the reason why I love somatic work is because like it could be open up this huge information portal basically of like,
mm,
wow, I'm really feeling like this tightness in my stomach or this constriction in my chest. And for a long time, I thought that meant this thing. And then when we begin to explore it in therapy, they're like, well, that actually, like I can manage that in this moment. Like I can explore these different tools to help manage that. And that emotion that I thought was going to be so overwhelming that I've been trying to avoid, oh, I actually can build skills to sit with it. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Or maybe it was like, that was really hard, but also like I can do that. Like the thing that it is that you're saying, I'm capable of actually building skills to manage that really, really hard emotion. So that's
mm,
what's like really cool in therapy, to start to unpack and uncouple these things that we've made meaning about and then write our own narrative around it. Like what
mm.
you said, that affirmation. I can handle hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I love that you mentioned that it's almost like, as you mentioned, separating the thoughts, and the thoughts are the limiting beliefs. As I mentioned, I'm not worthy, I'm not enough,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not lovable. These are thoughts. That's not emotion. Emotions are anger, rage, sadness, frustration, anxiety, disappointment. Those are the emotions. And I think like this is great that we're talking about this, because not a lot of people know how to separate these things. A lot of people don't have the information and the resources to understand that these are completely different things. So then, as you're right, as you mentioned, we start to unpack, right, and to differentiate and to detach, right, but also through that process is acknowledge providing that support around sitting with certain emotions, feeling them in the body, what sensations are arising and coming up, where do you feel it in your body, how do we allow to sit with it without making it your entire identity and who you are, but just honoring, like, hey, like actually validating and acknowledging that you're right, these are all emotions are valid, and there's no such thing as, for me, I know I get very much when I hear there's negative and positive emotions, because I think that also does lead to a lot of stigma when it comes to feeling or allowing ourselves to feel and sit with uncomfortable complex emotions. And I
Mm-hmm.
am a firm believer of of language and reframe. So I do definitely say, hey, these are all complex emotions. Our emotions are like a spectrum, right? We can be here, there, everywhere. And they're not negative or positive. All are very valid. Yeah, there are emotions that maybe lie on the spectrum that are a little bit kind of like difficult, complex, uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are the ones that are quote unquote what people call negative emotions. But I do believe that language is very powerful. And when I'm teaching also clients about emotions, I like to validate and acknowledge that they are kind of like a spectrum, and that we can allow ourselves to sit with them. And that's how we start to learn about ourselves as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I guess as you were talking about different tools, different activities, what do you think would be some self-soothing tools? How would you describe self-soothing tools when it comes to cultivating or practicing self-compassion? What would they be? If there's
Yeah.
any
Oh my
examples.
gosh. I love this. I love this question.
Mm-hmm.
And so in somatic experiencing, they talk about stabilization techniques, which is just like a fun way of saying, hey, like what helps you kind of like come back to presence? Like what kind of helps bring you back into like you're settling. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you're like, just like you and I did at the beginning, I'm like touching all these knobs and blah 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 blah. And I'm like looking around. And then finally there's like the flakes in the snow globe that are like, oh, okay, I'm here. And so some of the ways that I do that with my clients are like, okay, like let's kind of like take a look around the room. And then sometimes I'll invite them to notice 5 things that catch your eye, or I'll invite them to sense their ground, which is not like an active grounding practice, but just like, well, where is your center? How do you notice that? So that's like a physical thing. Also, like kind of like picturing that like snow globe thing. Like, how do you arrive? Like, how do you notice that you're like in the space, in the room with somebody? So that could be like, so that's highly individualized to the person. And then I'll ask them questions. Well, how do you know that? Is it in your breath? Is it in your physical sensations? Is it in your thoughts? Like you're noticing you're having maybe less thoughts about other things and more thoughts about what's happening here. So those are just like 3 things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's like the other fun ones, which is like you could be more active in your regulation practice,
Mm-hmm.
which is like laying on the ground, touching something soft,
Mm-hmm.
like self touch or
Mm-hmm.
stretching, movement. So I think all of those things can be really, really powerful. And like kind of to your point earlier, these are not just like TikTok, Instagram fads that are like, here are 5 things that you can do to help yourself feel better. Like these are really powerful
Mm-hmm.
practices that you can individualize to yourself to attune to what it is that you're needing.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Thanks for sharing that. I love the engaging the senses. That's something that I do integrate a lot with my clients. Also, breath work is something that I do. Tapping is another approach that I love. And also
Love it.
visualization and
Mm-hmm.
meditation, guided meditations that I do. Visualizations are amazing because I think that it really allows you to get in a safe space, right, where
Mm-hmm.
you visualize a safe space that feels good, and just like allowing yourself to kind of like be in that space, but also coming back and engaging those senses either in that space and then back in the present. So I think these are all amazing, powerful tools.
Mm-hmm.
um I realize that when it comes to like cultivating self compassion practices. And as you mentioned, everything is going to be very unique to everyone. I think for me is I think a lot of like, what are the things that are going to make you feel good, right? In the moment that are going to bring you to the present moment. It could also be drinking a glass of water. It could be
Mm-hmm.
like, taking a hot shower or even a cold shower, right? It could
Mm-hmm.
be touching something sensory, like anything sensory. It could be anything like putting cold water in your face. It could be anything that just allows you to be engaged in the moment, in the present moment, and something self-soothing. Think about something self-soothing. What helps me feel good, right?
Mhm.
So I guess I was also just thinking about how do we, whenever we, say if someone is struggling with a lot of hopelessness and a lot of helplessness, like really struggling to make those changes internally, either in therapy, maybe there might be a lot of like, I can't do that, I can't do that.
Right.
Um, how would you handle that, or what do you have to say about that? How can people manage that sense of helplessness or hopelessness?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the question. I think that there's definitely points on the spectrum of how hopeless one could feel.
Mm,
So, first and foremost, assessing for safety. And also, like, that's when I really start to get curious about, oh, well, when was the last time you felt like you could achieve something? Like, you felt like you did achieve something. Uh, And then that's kind of like when you start working with somebody around, like, okay, you made it here now to this session. And really, like, I think working with that in like a really tiny, tiny, tiny titrated way, because that hopelessness feels so big if we're just like, but then this and then this. Yeah, that could feel really like, wait a second, you're like giving me way too, like, shoving down positivity
mhm,
down someone's throat. So I would never like want to do that,
mhm,
but I would want to really like sit there with a client and ask them, like, okay, like, let's think about this for a moment. Like,
mhm,
what are some of the things that like are those like even like micro wins, and kind of go from there, because like we are in the practice of kind of, that's a skill, that's a muscle that you're building to help yourself feel something different or feel more, because I think ultimately you want to have choice, agency, autonomy around what you're feeling, what your perspective is, kind of like what we shared earlier.
mhm.
So in that, working on, you're here and you're here, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just glimmer, which is like, that's kind of a word that we hear online, even if it's just like
Mhm.
a glimmer of something positive. Okay, great. Can we acknowledge that for a second and we could come back? And just knowing that I'm like with them for every step of that. And we're just going back and forth until we can really like grow that muscle.
I love that because I do think, as you mentioned, this practicing self-compassion, and as I mentioned, there are three components: the self-kindness, and that it means if it helps to talk to yourself as your inner child or as someone that you care or love, um, that you're kind of imagining that you're talking to them or how you would talk to them, that's important,
Mm-hmm.
right? To be gentle with yourself in the way that you do talk to yourself, also embracing and embracing the common humanity and the mindfulness of being present, of yeah, being present, and then practicing things that will allow you to be in the present moment, to help you self-regulate in the moment, right, when maybe you're having a very difficult time. But I do
Right.
think that when it comes to just navigating some of these challenges and barriers of like feeling hopeless, feeling like there's no way that you can change, I do genuinely believe that finding a sense of community, finding a sense
Mm-hmm.
of finding relationships and cultivating relationships that will allow you to be seen, to be loved and cared for, that also is such a powerful thing to have. And I know that not a lot of people, we are going through this loneliness epidemic, right? That even before the pandemic or after the pandemic, we've seen that a lot of people are very much alone and they don't know how to engage in friendships and relationships. And that's also a very much struggle that I've seen. A lot of people kind of start thinking, well, is me, there's an issue with me, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. So, how do you think people can start maybe embracing the possibility of building a sense of community, and how does this all relate to self-compassion?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that's like, I think a multi-part answer is that part that you're talking about, like being witnessed in your experience. So, like, first acknowledging like the different things that you're feeling within yourself, right? Like, and then having support to help you do that and attune to that, and then like ask yourself the question, like, okay, these are hard emotions. What would I like instead? But then, like, the more that you get witnessed in that, I feel like the more you're able to like let that part of yourself in. Building community is an interesting thing because I think it also involves vulnerability and being willing to take risks. So there's kind of this interesting intersection of like, that feels scary to put yourself out there sometimes, but also it's important to be like witnessing your growth and feel that connection to people and know that they might have similar experiences. So usually I'm a true believer in like following your heart and your intuition. So I'm like, what is the thing that brings you joy or has brought you joy? And like start there. Like for the Cafecito Conchas and Chisme meetup group, I was just like, I just like want to hang out with other women, like in real life and talk. So I was like, okay, well, let's just see if anybody else wants to do that. But I mean, like sometimes I think to myself, like I really want a cookie. So I'll like walk out and find somewhere where I can buy a cookie and then see like who it is that I need along my path. So kind of just like taking that thought or like that feeling of, well, what is it that I'm like wanting in this moment? And then kind of taking action on that. Sometimes that needs support. Sometimes that feels scary. And like those are still things that you can do to take action around. So like, yeah, I mean, there's online things, but I really like the idea of like going out in the community and being like, what's up, neighbor? Hey, because talking to people can feel, you get like that co-regulation online. You're like, oh shit, what's up, Leroy?
Totally. I love that. And yes, I do definitely think that it does take another level of vulnerability and taking a risk, because that's relationships, right? When we're trying to build relationships and community. But at the end of the day, it does allow you to, or people to give themselves permission to be curious, to show up in these different ways. And I know that feeling a sense of belonging is also a big part of feeling like you're part of a community. There's a bigger purpose, right, that is there for you. And I think that that's very helpful to also, in a way of cultivating self-compassion, right, cultivating kindness, that if it's hard for you to even see it, right, that there's this common experience in humanity that everyone might be experiencing. So how do we allow, it's also allowing space to have these difficult conversations with other people, and have to be seen, to speak your truth, to use your voice, and to validate each other, and to acknowledge that it's okay, you know. And if it's even hard for say our audience who are struggling with building that self-compassion and rewiring these part of their brains, or like these neural pathways of learning to talk more positively or even more neutral, right? Because I think that that's something to also consider, that it doesn't have to be like this super unrealistic positive affirmation. It has to be something that you believe, that maybe something in the past that you've experienced, and that reminding yourself that you're capable, that you will figure it out. So it can start also with something more neutral. And then going from there based on the things that you also do allow yourself to do, like taking action, getting out of your comfort zone, right? Doing things that you've always been wanting to do, engaging in new habits, engaging in new hobbies, right? Exploring new interests. All of these things will really also boost your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and it will kind of, like, as I mentioned, going back to these rewiring these new neural pathways, where you can acknowledge and sit with it and realize, okay, I'm taking risk, I'm allowing myself to do all these new things, and I can recognize the big wins, the little wins, because this is all part of this process and this journey, right? Yeah.
Definitely.
All right, Claudia. Well, is there anything else that you'd want to share? Say maybe a message for anyone who is really going through a difficult time right now, who is maybe struggling with being self-compassionate and kind and giving themselves grace. Is there a message that you'd like to share with them?
I think I just want to say, like, you're not alone. Even though, like, I may not know you, I've also had my own version of that, like, really difficult experience. And you can be supported. And there are others out there just like you who also have hard times, and that there is hope. Like, there is hope that these thoughts and feelings and sensations, you can move out of them. And then you get to be supported in that. And that's just like sending you so much love, like sending them so much love. Like, I see you in my own, like, through the universe, right? Like through the ethers, like I'm witnessing you. So
I
yeah.
love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And Claudia, where can our listeners, our audience, find you, work with you?
Thank you. Yeah. So if you're in the Bay Area and you're Latina, you can meet up with us at the Cafecito Conchas and Chisme meetup. We're going to do monthly. I love being on Instagram, so you can check me out on Instagram at It's Claudia Parada. My website is Claudia Parada Energy, claudiaparadaenergy.com. And I am accepting therapy and coaching clients. So you can just hit me up in my DMs or schedule a free consultation, and we can talk about how I can support you.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you everyone who have joined to this episode, listening to this episode. Feel free, as I mentioned, to share it with anyone who you think might need it. And I hope this was helpful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow on YouTube, and also on Spotify and on Instagram. And I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.